Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world. Woo! Are you worn out yet? It's only the second week of January. He hasn't even been inaugurated, and it is all on. And we are going to dig into it as we uniquely do with another important, inspiring, and interesting guest, a guy I've wanted to have on for a very long time who can give us perspective, especially on the Hegseth madness and everything related. My friend, the great and powerful Kevin Barron is finally here on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
How you doing, man?
I don't know, man. I'm surprisingly cool. How are you doing?
I'm fine, man. I'm riding the wave, just like watching it all unfold, getting ready for who knows what's gonna come after Inauguration Day. Like you said, we're not even there yet, and man, it's coming. I'm remembering what it was like the first time around, and I think we're in for a whole lot more.
Whole another level. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's not even a wave. I think we got to be ready for like a new flood that stays there,
Yeah.
right? It's just like, and it's going to keep going up, right? Like we're going to use some weather dynamics here. But let me ask you the question I do ask everybody: where are you? And really, how are you? You're a dad. You're a journalist. You're a national security guy. But where are you physically? And how are you?
So I'm in the great Northern Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C., where we've had snow on the ground unusually for more than a week now. But you can't go skiing around here. So it pains my soul to see all this great white and not be able to get out in it. And yeah, I'm a longtime journalist who I left the newsroom back in September, and I'm working on building my own thing, TBD. And I'm ready to kind of like dive into the new year. And like I said, just watching this interim periods from November to next week unfold. Um, it's just like, wow, if this is a preview of what's to come, get ready. I was saying to someone this morning, I said, when these immigration roundups happen, like there are people they think it's going to be like the rapture. Suddenly, people are just going to be gone. Like, what happened to that neighbor, and what happened to my kid's soccer coach, and it's going to be a whole different world real soon, I think. So,
And you think that's an exaggerated concern or not?
um, I don't think it's exaggerated. I'm trying to take the position where you know the um the policy changes and the culture shift comes with the MAGA right that has taken over the center right that if ever one existed. The shit's real, man. And I said yesterday after the part of the Hegseth hearing, I was on with Katie Couric, and she was asking about some of this, and I said, look, like women in combat, for example, and then wanting to, revert the clock decades and pull women out of combat roles. And I just said, this is the kind of thing that it's not normal to say, well, half the country may want this and half the country doesn't, and now it's their turn to make policy. This is an extreme position. It is a fringe position, and it's rooted in all sorts of fringe and extreme policy positions and cultural positions and Christian nationalism and all sorts of things. And it's coming front and center, and it's being just like sent on its merry way right to the e-ring of the Pentagon by the GOP Senate, who, GOP senators who I've covered for years and were supposed to be the adults in the room that would, keep the partisan politic crazies out of the room. And instead now are embracing it, and they've grabbed the tiger's tail, and we haven't even got started yet. So yeah, I'm trying to just figure out how do you ride this wave, what to expect the next 4 years, both, personally, but as a reporter, as an analyst, as a national security professional, and say, this is all right, this is something that's happening, this is a movement, this is what the country wants, this is really happening, but nobody knows what it's going to look like. I just think
Mm.
that I'm in the camp of people saying it's not going to be like last time. Like we've all said, there won't be guardrail type of people in the room. Just the opposite. There will be enablers in the room, and they will be forcefully enabling what they feel they have the mandate to do. Rightfully, in a lot of cases, they do. And how do you navigate that? I'm also
So
looking outside. Last thing I'll say, it's also making me think, maybe just because of my wise old ages, I've been in DC for 25 years of other circles of power, other circles of influence, other circles of, business, academic culture, other ways that the world spins that's not just DC politics. And I know you're big on this. You've been hammering the Democrats and folks who are looking to government and politicians for solutions. There's part of me that's shifting in that way too.
yeah, I mean, there's a failure of creativity, right? And I
Mm,
want to
yeah.
dig into Hegseth with you on a number of levels. and I've been very critical of the Democrats. I will continue to be that way because at the end of the day, what I think we've got is the culture war steamroller is picking up steam, right? Like the Trump train, they always say the Trump train, it's a Trump steamroller, and it's
Mhm.
not slowing down, it's speeding up because it's getting momentum and it's winning. And Hegseth, I've said this before, is like the lead element with the flag out in front and the tattoos on the chest. I mean, he is the embodiment of all this. And I think you're right to say it's
And he's
extreme.
that shaman hat, like
Yeah, I mean, it's not much further than that, man. I mean, he was schlepping ammunition and stuff like a couple weeks ago, and this is our new normal. But I also think too many on the left have kind of poo-pooed it or thought it dismissed it, or this is happening. But I think what I really want to talk to you is because you understand the culture of the Pentagon. You've covered, I don't know, a dozen different secretaries of defense. You know the building, and I want to just kind of drill down on something that I hear a lot, which is. And I felt myself yesterday. Holy fucking shit, it's Pete Hegseth, right? Like we all know this guy, right? Anybody
Yeah.
who watches Fox News knows this guy, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that they can make such a reach and almost make it normal, right? Try to make it feel normalized is not okay in my view, right? And the thing that we as experts with context and perspective and historical understanding and people who knew Chuck Hagel and Panetta and Bob Gates and so many others, this guy, yeah, I think Blumenthal kind of said it yesterday. He would be a great Pentagon spokesperson.
Yeah.
If you've been in that room, you know what that job is. And I always thought Pete Hegseth, great press secretary, but Secretary of fucking Defense, no way, right?
I'll actually argue that I don't think he'd be a good press secretary. I think he'd be like a good kind of chief of staff, one of those guys the guy who stands on the side of the briefing room when the principal comes out. And the press secretary actually knows how to talk to the press, and they know they have to build relationships with the press, and so they know how to like be a flack for the boss, but also to work truth, especially when there's a national security crisis moment, and we've all been called in at like 10 p.m. on Saturday because they're about to kill Bin Laden or some big thing like that. Moments like that, where you're like, all right, this is where truth happens. That's different than like the body men who are really the true followers of the SECDEF, right? And so I don't know where you place this guy, but yes, I said the same things yesterday, and I'll tell you whatever you want to know about Hegseth, but just impression wise. But yeah, in any other normal world, there's no way he would even have a person would not have, with his background, would not have accepted the nomination in the first place. Would not, he wouldn't have put himself there thinking he had the chops to do it. But these are the types of people that you get in politics, and when you get true believers and activists, and he's thrilled to be serving at the pleasure of the president.
Can you take us inside the Pentagon? I mean, I
Mm.
don't know. You've seen them. I mean, I'm trying to think of who is the most significant opposite of Pete Hegseth, right? And maybe it's Lloyd Austin, right? Who's a retired flag grade. He's African American. He did 40 plus years in the military. He never talked to the press probably until he was in like a flag grade position. I'm just trying to draw the
Yeah.
contrast here because Pete Hegseth can call it DEI and woke and all that shit, but on day one, you've got the Gaza peace deal. On day two, you've
Yeah.
got, North Korea firing nukes. And this is all the stuff you covered at Defense One and everywhere else for so well. So I think it's going to be really clear how in over his depth he is when that first thing hits his desk. But can you
Usually
kind
those
of
first,
compare and contrast
yeah.
it to other SecDefs?
Usually the SecDef's first trip is like straight to Japan and South Korea. It's to the treaty allies, and it's to talk to the defense ministers and to meet the prime ministers. Quickly after they end up attending one of the regularly scheduled meetings of the NATO defense ministers, the MINDEF meetings, and making those relationships happen. And usually the people that have those jobs, they already kind of know each other because they've grown up in those
Right.
careers together. That's a good question. Who would be his opposite? I mean, Lloyd Austin is a good candidate for that. Like you said, he made it to the top as a senior officer, not a junior officer. He's a West Pointer. He is African American and was, given this rank, you could argue because of that, he was a good candidate to finally get some minorities into these senior ranks more frequently. He was, known to the Bidens. He's an elite insider. He was known for, he was a surprise when he was nominated. Remember, what people didn't know.
He was Bo's commander, wasn't he? Right,
Yeah,
and Bo knew him
people didn't know
personally.
Lloyd Austin was even on the radar for this job. If you weren't in the super inner circle, you thought it was going to Michelle Flournoy back then, another
Right.
DC insider. So that's a kind of a good example. And he's a quiet commander. He's a quiet commander too, but also that's part of the Democratic way where even in the Obama years, the Democrats try the simple version of this is the Democrats want to demilitarize foreign policy. And it was a bit of a response to the George W. Bush years where everything was, gung-ho military in the post 9/11 days. And they were like trying to all right, we got to rebalance this and soften it. Actually, the Secretary of State is supposed to be the voice of America around the world, not the SECDEF. And they kind of turned that on its head. And, if your bravado Republicans don't like that, they want, the opposite to happen. I think a better example might be Ash Carter. You
Mm.
know, Ash Carter was brilliant. He was a nuclear physicist, MIT, and he was a lifelong public servant in and out of these bureaucratic political or career jobs, the kind of ones that that Trump MAGA world seems to hate, that they think are red tape and unnecessary, and really worked his way up and wasn't super well known until he became the deputy SecDef. And before then, he was the chief weapons buyer of the Pentagon, the different title. The deputy secretary of defense is like the point man for the entire defense industry to the Pentagon. And
Mm.
usually, at least in those warrior days, like the defense secretary was seen as the policy guy who was like going out to Afghanistan and making the public appearances. And the Dep Sec guy, he's going to the expos and the trade shows and dealing with, Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics and all that, the multi-billion, $100 world. Except that Ash Carter was doing both, and people didn't realize it. He was also going around the world and doing the policy connections. So when he got the job, he really came to it as somebody with governing experience, with agency leadership experience, and with lots of experience in the outside world, not just as a DC insider. He wasn't a mover and shaker. He wasn't a party, party hopping. I mean, like reception party, political party kind of guy around town. Um,
He
and
wasn't taking his staff to strip clubs and getting bombed in the back of a party bus.
No, he was. Yes, good reference. He was instead. He's the guy credited with making the link with Pentagon and Silicon Valley and the tech world to start this new era that we're in. Pete Hegseth is inheriting, if it gets confirmed, where it's a world where the Pentagon and how you measure military might is no longer and the number of ships and the number of planes, rather it's the technology on them and the whole non-kinetic war world we're about to get into with cyber and everything else. So all that to say, all of the things of a man like that's life compared to the Pete Hegseth option. Now, the devil's advocate here is that Pete Hegseth is exactly the kind of guy for the job that Trump wants. Exactly the kind of guy that the entire MAGA world wants, and exactly what they said they wanted. Um, Now, no voter would ever know like who he's going to be his choice for SecDef, and even the Republicans were really shocked. They were shocked by Tulsi Gabbard's nomination. They're shocked by lots of these. Not Mike Waltz. We heard Mike Waltz was going to be SecDef. Maybe Tom Cotton, a member of
Right.
Congress, some government experience. Still, people are saying for years that Tom Cotton's name has been on that list, and he doesn't have the experience to run it. Maybe now he's been in DC long enough as a senator, but not at the beginning of his days. Look at a Bob Gates, a lifelong government servant who was an acting CIA director, deputy national security advisor, Leon Panetta, his whole background. The MAGA world's argument is that's exactly the problem. All of
Mhm.
those guys are part of the problem. They're institutional. They kept us in wars we didn't need. They didn't move fast enough. They left us a Pentagon that's clearly outgunned for the next war in every way that you might measure, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, we need to blow up the system and put in a different guy.
Can we drill down to something I think you and I are uniquely positioned to have a conversation about, which
Yeah.
is the narrative and language change that they have introduced and are doubling down on is very intentional. And I want to kind of describe it.
Yeah.
It's almost like, bringing in this Dana White, WWE, Sean Ryan, Jocko Willnick, like the podcast guys, right? It, it's
Joe
uh
Rogan,
it's
yeah.
everybody's a pussy except for these guys, right? if you're not a certain way, you're a
Oh, what do you
communist.
mean? How many push-ups did you do today?
Yeah, I know. I did 36 this morning. And like, I didn't do four sets of 47 or whatever he
I was
did.
tell you that was
Uh,
literally a question in
I know. That was a real
Exodus
question,
confirmation.
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a
Yeah.
question. It's a big talk thing that is
Hmm.
almost un-American, right? Like we've never seen an American defense secretary talk shit like this, right? Even a Rumsfeld or someone else was a bit more diplomatic, but this guy is using words like lethality and warfighter, right? It's red meat for the base, and this kind of almost caricature of
Well,
what our
yeah, but
military
I'll give
is,
you
right?
all of that except the lethality and warfighter goes back to everywhere. I mean, I've heard that shit
Right,
be
right.
Mattis. That's and
Right, right. But
one of
we're
my
talking about lethality all the time, and we're talking about
yeah,
war fighters, but we didn't really talk about,
yeah.
but we didn't really talk at all about cyber, right? Cyber, which is maybe our most imminent, one of the biggest threats, an ongoing threat. Like you didn't hear Pete Hegseth talk about his strategy for defending us against cyber attacks, which might be the thing that's happening right
I know, but
now.
you also didn't hear any senators ask him. That
Right.
whole hearing was
Absolutely.
about like how
Absolutely.
you're a shithead, how you treat women in your real life, defend that, and he had to do that. And you were bad at anything close to related was these veterans groups, and you're bad at that. Talk about that. Nobody asked him, hey man, what's your theory for the use of military force abroad? What's your theory on alliances? Do you think that, if North Macedonia, if 1 inch, that's what Biden's been saying for NATO. If North Macedonia loses territory, 1 inch of territory, are you really committed to sending U.S. troops, possibly in a nuclear armed way, to defend every inch of the NATO alliance? What are your thoughts on Southeast Asia and access to the ports and combating China? What are you going to do about the Quad? Are you willing to give concessions to anyone? How are you going to work with the Indians in their rise? How are you going to work with the global South? What are your thoughts on the future of organizational structures like the United Nations? I don't know. Where do you want to start, ball? Like, fuck.
Yeah, so
Come on.
can we drill down? I want to go to the lethality thing, but I also think the contrast that I saw that has to be named, and MSNBC and others can't name this, which is like you had Mark Wayne Mullen, right? Guy, no jacket on. I'm a tough guy. I'm talking shit. And then you had Hirono, who was like this and
Yeah.
was meek and old and female and like hasn't served in the military. And there was this striking contrast over and over again of like tough talking, generally younger men, right? White men exclusively, and
Mhm.
then older civilian women, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, you have Tammy Duckworth, etc. But at some point, I felt like it wasn't even a fair fight because you just didn't have people of that culture fighting it out.
Well,
It
that's
kind
a
of cuts
that's a
to the
good
core of
point.
what, right?
I think you make a good point, but I see it. I mean, in some way, it's not surprising. Everybody complains about how old the Senate is and how out of touch, these kind of national politicians become. They're all, millionaires and elites in all the different ways. So to send in anybody of like a younger generation who's like a hot mouth, of course that's a clash. I mean, it's like when you see Mark Zuckerberg go up on the Hill, it's, and talk to these old guys who are like, I don't really know how to start my computer, but tell me more about, the Facebook.
Yeah,
Kind of like that. I know
that's a
it's a
good comparison. That's a
um,
good comparison.
yeah, so like, when you did have like Duckworth, it stands out. Like, here's a woman who can talk. Literally, she can say whatever the hell she wants for her service. But you could also compare it to Joni Ernst, which I said on yesterday on another show, like how, Joni Ernst was a good example of one of these types where you when she came onto the scene as a politician, people thought, oh, okay, she's got this veteran war experience. She'll be one of the adults in the room that will resist the partisan craziness of like the bomb throwers and be one of these, she'll be she'll align with McCain in the old ways of like being a real overseer of the Pentagon, a person of the Senate, a person of the legislative branch. And then, even in this case, she's a combat veteran. She says she's a victim of sexual assault herself, and she's still making excuses to pass Hegseth. That's the world that we're in now. That's the difference. Now, I think again, this shows to it just reveals to me MAGA's success, right? A guy like Hegseth seems to make sense to a lot of people. He seems to be more in touch than the other people who are asking the questions on the dais, the people who actually have the power, the entire purse over the Pentagon. That committee
Yeah.
controls the Pentagon unless they're being controlled by the Pentagon and the system, depending on who's in charge of that gavel, depending on how strong they want to be. Nobody questioned McCain's power. Nobody questioned Carl Levin's power. They questioned Inhofe's power. He was not as people that aren't as strong there. And I don't know how Wicker's going to be. I think Wicker was a guy a lot of people think, all right, he's not a far right extreme guy. He's, Mississippi shipbuilder. He's really smart in the ways of defense and especially the industry. He knows this stuff and he does. And that's why he's risen that community, made it a priority. I've talked to him at the Munich Security Conference, like a lot of reporters. He lives in this world. And he came out yesterday, ready to hand the keys to Pete Hegseth,
Fell in
which
line,
is
just like the rest of them,
baffling.
right?
It's
Yeah.
baffling to people,
But
but
you
it's
touched
not
on
baffling to
something.
me because I've been covering. I've seen this for a long time.
Yeah.
These are politicians. They're politicians. They have to make deals with people. They have to they have to protect their own interests. They will protect their own interests. And so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that, this is a sail through.
But you said something that's right. Like they're not in touch. Right. And I think that's the authenticity is the brand of Trump. Like, I really know what's going. It's a grievance too, right? Power. Ken Burns has been on my show before and talks about the power of grievance. But there was a moment where Hegseth looked at Jack Reed and said something like, I know as a combat veteran, which was a fuck you to Jack Reed, because he knows that Jack Reed, Ranger qualified, 82nd Airborne, never was in combat, right? And you could see Reed's face, but there was I know what I'm talking about and you don't, which he could hold with everybody except for Tammy Duckworth, maybe, right? And he didn't really get into it with
No, but he does with her too, because he thinks she got her job because she's a woman or a minority.
right,
And oh, you were a helicopter pilot. You would have
right.
grown the ground.
But Kelly,
there's
the
always,
astronaut,
you know this,
Kelly, the
man. You're a
astronaut and fighter
veteran. I'm not.
pilot, right?
You know more than I do as veterans. There's always a veteran who thinks that you're not as good a veteran or your service didn't count as much
Oh yeah.
because you were a fob hobbit, right? I know these words.
The
You were
whole world of military is like a giant dick measuring contest, right?
yeah,
We
of
all know
course.
that, right?
So
And
we'll go back to your original point of
yeah,
Hegseth. I feel like you could have picked this guy off the range and down in Tampa. It was any other guy who did his time. He's like wearing soft kit. He's living at Monkey Bar, like, or Bad Monkey, whatever it's called. Like he lives the life. And man, does MAGA world love it? They love it. They love it. They love it. That's the America they want. That's their version of strength and projection that they want. It's not bookishness. It's not the people that led the wars of the last 20 years, which they think led us nowhere and got us right back to where we started. So again, I just feel you could find a disruptor who believes all those things that MAGA world believes, who still has more qualifications than Hegseth as
right,
far as
right.
running a major organization. You can find a state governor, you can find a legislator, you can find another like CEO of a company or a university president. You can find plenty of people if you wanted them. Trump didn't want them. He wanted
Kevin, what is the most you know this stuff inside and out?
yeah.
What's the biggest thing from a national security priority standpoint that never even came up and got touched on yesterday?
Oh, I'd have to think of the list again. I mean,
But if
I
you were
think
going to prioritize all of them and you were saying, hey, Senator, this is, you're the advisor in the back room advising a senator on either side. We got to get to this.
Yeah, I mean, if we replaced all the time spent on Hegseth's personal stuff and what I would want to hear more of, I want to hear more of the future of European security and NATO, and this idea that that Trump did help kind of spur more than already was happening, because it already was happening, that the Europeans have to do more to defend themselves. It's time. It's past time. But it's still at the very beginnings. Like Europe can't just turn on factories and start making bullets faster than we make them in North Carolina. They have to. It's taken a long time, but it's going in the right direction. It's a fascinating story, and it's great if you believe that's what we need, because that war isn't over. The Ukraine war isn't over. Putin's still alive. This is going to go on for a long time. The entire NATO, round table in Brussels is going to turn to this guy and go, "What does the United States want?" He's got it. So I wish they would have prepped him and like drill him on that. China. I was watching Rubio's hearing today. Rubio can talk about China, all day long until he's blue in the face. Like that guy knows China. He knows those issues. Talk all about, and in a very nuanced way. You can't just turn China off. This isn't like the Soviet Union. We are connected to China. Half the country wants to stay connected to China. We make billions of dollars dealing with China. And, again, this phase is going to pass too, and we want to be able to continue. What are you going to do about the future of power and the difference of military power? People want to ask them about non-defense power, like the soft power world. Bob Gates and others talked about this stuff all the time back in the day. Like, okay, great. You want us to, Trump's going to want a massive increase in spending in the Pentagon. We all think, and a lot of us think a lot of it is overdue and needed. I think we're going to reach $1 trillion under this presidency for the Pentagon budget for the first time.
Yep.
What are you going to do with it? Ask them about technology. Ask them about AI. Ask them about, Oshkosh. Ask them about F-35s and sixth generation fighters. Ask them if he really wants to fight China. We need more missiles. Great. How many more? How many ships? You want 300 more ships than the 300 we have? Who's going to build them? Are you willing to pay for it? Are you going to come to Capitol Hill and are you going to advocate, what are the non-defense discretionary expenditures that we need to cut to pay for those defense? Take your pick, man. Take your pick. There's so
yeah.
But strategic priorities, I think, right now are the future of NATO. I think that's enormous, especially because we're in this season where the Munich Security Conference is coming up, Davos is coming up. There are going to be giant global conversations where this happens, and there's a big pulse check moment, and they're all going to be about what do we do now that Trump is back? How do we react? How do we Trump-proof ourselves like they did last time? We didn't hear about any of that. We heard nothing.
It's a good thing Hegseth can read a prompter, because he's going to be reading from a lot of pages in the next couple of weeks if he's confirmed. Let me ask you something you might be uniquely positioned to talk about.
Well, you should point out, this is why Senator Wicker limited the questioning to one round, and Reid was, I think, right to point out this is not normal for any other SECDEF, Republican or Democrat. Usually, any senator that's got a question, they just keep going around, and they go to lunch.
Yeah.
They come. Chuck Hagel was a 2-day process. They brought him for a second hearing,
and it was brutal. And it was he had a bad first hearing.
They decided to have it in a smaller room in the Capitol building, not the main hearing room. They barely put out a notice about it. I was a reporter at the time, making sure I got into the room and I was part of the report on what happened, because Hagel was a Republican who was getting dogged by other Republicans because they knew he was against the Iraq War. He was questioning a lot of the issue, the policies Republicans wanted, was siding with the Democrats as he does sometimes. He's still a Republican from Nebraska. And it was insane what they put him through. It wasn't insane. It was just unexpected and unusual. Whereas Hegseth...
And he struggled, right? There was a question of whether or not Chuck Hagel was qualified to be SECDEF. And, for all this talk of, we need somebody with dirt on their boots, Chuck Hagel's got 2 Purple Hearts and pulled his brother out of a burning vehicle in Vietnam. I mean, this kind of rewrite...
Chuck Hagel still has shrapnel in his body from Vietnam.
Yeah, still has shrapnel in his body. Right.
Actually, I'll tell you a Chuck Hagel story you might like that's related to this. About the culture bravado of I know more than you. I'm a combat guy. I'm a trigger puller. I'm more manly. I'm more whatever it was. When Hagel was coming up, McCain was dogging him. McCain did not want what Hagel was going to bring because McCain wanted more intervention. He wanted to bomb Iran. Right? He was in a different place back then. He was more supportive of keeping the boot on the gas out in the Middle East. And he was like, we got to keep fighting, keep doing those things. We were on a trip with Hagel after he became SECDEF, and it may have been his first trip. We were out in Asia, and one of the reporters asked him, this has since come public, it was like a off the record moment, and so, asked him about, McCain was famously the most famous POW of all from Vietnam. You were in Vietnam. But you guys are on such opposite ends. How does that happen? Like, what do you think about when you hear him question you and all that? Hagel's response was very interesting. He goes, John McCain was a Navy pilot in the air. I was an infantryman on the ground. And those are 2 very different war experiences. Not to denigrate anyone's experience. They're all valuable what they are. His experience was flying overhead and dropping bombs. My experience was seeing the effect of those bombs firsthand. And he still has them in his body. That's why he felt it was much easier for a veteran like McCain to want to prove and conduct military interventions and actions abroad, and why it was harder for a veteran like Chuck Hagel to say yes. He was right where Obama was, which was a much higher bar for saying yes to military interventions. People forget that. They think of like,
I think it's important.
Trump wants to keep the United States out, and Obama wanted to fight. No, Obama.
I've been honored to know Hagel, and he's been on this show before. And, I know that, Chuck Hagel's told stories about walking point with his brother.
Yeah.
Right. He would take point and he felt okay when his brother was on point. I mean, they didn't put brothers together. I don't know how they got around that, but that's fucking nuts, right? To be
Yeah.
in Vietnam, in the shit next to
Yeah.
your brother. And then they both got, I think, combined 5 Purple Hearts, right? So they got banged up along the way too. But the contrast is really stark. Speaking of contrast, I want to come to you and get your football predictions. This is going to be something we're doing from now on in this show. So hang with me for a second. I'm going to come to
Yes.
that. But before I do, and maybe you could stick around for 5 minutes of extra content for our Patreon members. You want to hear Kevin Barron's music recommendations and other things personal. So Patreon members, thank you for making this possible. Stick around for that. If you're not watching on YouTube, please watch us on YouTube, subscribe, hit that subscribe button. We're doing a lot more video. Kevin, you know the Pentagon, you know the building. How significant is the purge going to be? Both the purge by Hegseth, where he's going to clean out people who aren't loyalists, and the self-inflicted purge. People are just going to say, fuck it, I'm out. Right? Like, how do we quantify? And there's always going to be these folks say, I'm staying in to fight them, or I'm getting the hell out, right? I don't think it's going to be long before we get a Vindman type whistleblower who says, I was in the room and I heard whatever. But in mass, I feel like it's like congestion pricing. How are we going to quantify the percentage of people who are no longer driving into the city? Like, how big do you think, in terms of impact and even scope, the number of people leaving either because he kicks them out or because they want to select out?
I think it'll be big. It's so hard to quantify because the Pentagon is so big, and the Pentagon is just like the one office building for the DoD, right? The Pentagon's like 35,000 people in an organization of 3 million. But I will tell you, I remember in Trump 1 years, the just the example for reporters, right? Reporters' offices are like down this long hall near the briefing room that's around the corner from where the SECDEF is and the chairman is, so that we're near the leadership by design in the Pentagon. Makes it easier for them to walk to the briefing room when they have to. But in between the briefing room and us is a very big, wide office of cubicles. That's the Pentagon Public Affairs main office. It's big. I don't know, maybe 50 desks in there or something like that. It's a large place. It was empty in the Trump years. It was after being just overflowing and busy in the years before. Granted, war years also, but it was empty because one by one, and it's a mix of that room is a mix of civilians and uniforms, right? So there's like people at the end of their career in the army that they got a couple more years and they end up as PAOs, these public affairs officers, mixed in with civilians who have been there for decades and are experts at weapon systems and policies. And one by one, people were leaving and it was empty. State Department, same thing. Remember, there was like a big, like people were quitting, giving up, and they didn't want to be it. State's a little different because you're representing policy in a different way than Pentagon. In the military, if you're in uniform, this, it's different. There's no in and out of a career and you're out, especially at that level. But it's also it's a pyramid that gets steeper and steeper at the top where there's very few billets the farther up you get. So because it automatically there's a bit of self-selection. So when something like this comes, they're not just thinking like, do I want to stick around during Trump? They're thinking like, do I want to stay in uniform for another 4 years? Where am I going to get deployed? Is it going to be worth it? Am I going to get I want that star before I go? My kids are of a certain age. They're in college or they're in whatever. So there's all sorts of life decisions, as you know, to like, do I stay or do I go? In addition to, do I want to carry out this policy? So yes, I think you'll have plenty of career civil servants and who will stay because they stayed through it all. They've been here since Rumsfeld. They've been here there are people like that who, and a lot of their jobs, they really are pretty far removed from policy. Their job is to make sure that the helmet visor of an F-35 pilot that's being, is meeting the requirements that are in page 500 of the bill. That's their, right. They don't care about what Trump says or does. Like, that's different. So I think where it hits is like that ASD level. So you got the SECDEF, DepSecDef, then you get an undersecretary policy.
ASD meaning Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Secretaries of Defense who are for Middle East, for SOLIC, for all sorts of these buckets. Those are the people that come up through the ranks through like Heritage Foundation. On the liberal side, they're coming up through Center for New American Security and the Truman, project. And
Yep.
there are young and rising smart people who want experience in the agencies and government so that one day they can be, something big in their careers. This is the career ladder in national security and defense at the Pentagon. That's where it takes a real hit. So a lot of those jobs were empty, and Trump won because either so many people signed those never Trumper letters saying I would never serve, and or they were blacklisted by the Trump people because they did or not. So even if you signed a letter or initially you say you weren't going to help Trump, and 2 years later you're like, all right, I want to help. They need help, or I should do it. They said no, we don't want you. Well, from what we're hearing, that's already the case. Like if you worked with Pompeo, you're out. If you worked with Nikki Haley, you're out. You don't get a job. So they need to find conservatives, find Republicans who they can at least either are loyalists or they quietly can stomach Trump, but they want to do the job. They want to get it on their resume because they know they'll be here for 30, 40 years, not just 4. And I don't know what's out there yet. Like if you work at AEI, if you're someone like a Corey
Yep.
Shockey, or if you're
Right.
Richard Fontaine at CNAS, these are people that worked for McCain, that worked for Bush, that are respected and highly respected leaders in the community that are shunned out of Trump world. And they will not have any say in policy unless
Yeah.
they whisper it.
And
That's the kind of effect
But the
they
next
have.
Vivek Ramaswamy or some random tech dude or
Yeah.
somebody's kid is
Like
going
I
to
don't know
be
who Pete's going to bring with him too. Like people bring with them,
Yeah.
they bring staffers, they bring
Yep.
and they tap their friends, and we don't know who those people are going to be. That's the real effect.
Okay, let's do something different. Quick fire football predictions. We're going to need a break from all of this.
Games.
And we've had the most amazing football over the last couple of weeks. I know you're a sports and culture guy. I'm just going to start with the big one. National championship game is the night of inauguration. Holy shit. It's Martin Luther King Day, inauguration, and then a national championship game, which is on many levels just a security issue, right? Like talk about Secretary of Defense. Like the Secretary of Defense will have to at least have a briefing somewhere on security at the national championship game, right? Because you got what 100,000 people there, 80,000 people there.
I guess,
Notre
yeah.
Dame versus all that. Notre Dame versus Ohio State. Who are you picking?
All right, man. So I got deep roots in this, and I'm telling you, I grew up in Florida. My dad went to Florida State. We're a Florida State Seminoles family, so we're hurting this year. That said, I've got a Big Ten son, and it was at Penn State. I have cousins who went to Ohio State. I have a brother who went to Michigan State. All that to say, man, and I remember 1993 when an undefeated Florida State with Charlie Ward went into South Bend and got beat by Notre Dame in a close game, but then went on to win the rest of our games and make it to the national championship and win. And Notre Dame never forgave us for that because they lost the next week to Boston College. In the old days, that meant you were out. There was no playoff. All that to say, I watched Notre Dame the last couple games, and man, am I impressed. Those guys have heart. They find a way. And they're exciting. I like what their young coach is doing. And I gotta say, I'm looking forward to rooting for the Fighting Irish.
Boom, Notre Dame it is. Chris may be able to pop up graphics here. I concur. I have been watching Notre Dame all year. I think they got some unique magic. They believe, which
That
makes them
reach for the touchdown, that reach over the goal line.
Oh, it was such a and I was even like almost torn when they played Army at Yankee Stadium, but that was a tune-up game for them. But Riley Leonard's got a little magic. They've got the Notre Dame mystique. Ohio State has kind of become the bad guy in a lot of ways, and they're a
Yeah,
machine.
you're not wrong about that. I'm sorry, man. Kirk Herbstreit isn't doing any love to make me like him or
No, but
Ohio State.
I think that Ohio State's almost like the new Alabama, but without the wins. And ultimately, I'm going with Notre Dame. All right, now we got NFL football. We're gonna have to rattle through these quick
All right.
until I get some like Fanatic sponsorship or something else.
Wait,
All right,
don't you want
first
to hear
game.
Notre Dame? You want to hear that fight song? You want to hear the Notre Dame fight song in the
Oh
championship?
yeah. I mean, if you don't think you want to go to a Notre Dame game, you hate America.
Yes, there you
If
go.
you don't want to go to a Notre Dame game,
Dude,
you are really woked out, and there's some like DEI Hegseth slander about why you hate
I was about to
America.
say this is the most Hegseth I've ever seen you right now.
Yeah, this is me. All right, so Texans Chiefs first game Saturday 4:30. Texans going to Arrowhead against the Chiefs. Who you got?
Chiefs. Why are we even talking about this? Like
I agree.
zero
I agree. It's
zero
going to be
question.
fun
Don't
to
even bother watching. Go to the farmer's market.
No, it's going to be fun to watch CJ Stroud, and you never know. Anything can happen. It's still the NFL, but the Chiefs, I think, are getting warmed up, and then they're going to have to fight against, I think, the Bills next week. But all right, let's go to your hometown guys. The amazing upstart, now called Commanders, have to go into Detroit. Lions, like we always feel a little uneasy about the Lions, right? It's like the Democrats, you feel like they're always going to find a way to fuck it up. But the Commanders and their electrifying quarterback, Jaden Daniels, are going into Detroit. Who you
Mm-hmm.
got?
So I have a lot of logic in this pick because I'm a Packers fan who can't stand the Lions and know that the Lions have been a joke my entire life. But Washington is not my hometown. Washington is where I moved to. And anybody who's lived here the last 25 years and had to endure Dan Snyder, you could not pay me enough money to root for the Washington any name team. So, hey man, I'm riding the Detroit bandwagon with Eminem, 8 Mile all the way. Go Lions.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I love the pride thing. I love Dan Campbell. He was a great tight end for the Giants.
Same
The
thing.
Ahmad St. Brown story is amazing about how he changed his name. His dad was Mr. Universe and he speaks German. The Lions, I just think got to just stay steady. Stay steady. I think what they did against Minnesota was awesome. I'm rooting for them to go all the way. I'm with you. I got the Lions. All right. The first Sunday game, 3 o'clock. The Rams, who are riding some special energy, got a bit of experience, right? They got a quarterback who played solid as their opponent. Who was it? Totally imploded this weekend. But it was the Vikings. They just shellacked the Vikings,
Yes.
right? Where Sam Darnold became the Sam Darnold we know. It's like Joni Ernst, right? Like you kind of hope Joni Ernst is going to be something different, but she ends up being Joni Ernst. That's Sam Darnold. But all right, Rams go in to play the Eagles, who now have Saquon, who I miss every single day. Who you got? Rams or Eagles?
This is a tough one, man. It's like Saquon versus Jared Verse on the Rams side. Where's the game? At Philly?
Philly, yeah.
I think I still might pull for the I expect the Eagles will pull it out, but I'm gonna root for the Rams. So I'll pick
Yeah,
the Rams.
I'm all right. I'm with you on that, but I think the Eagles are going to win. I mean, it might be closer than anticipated. The Eagles have looked like they're hitting their stride. Saquon's just fucking awesome, and
I just don't want to have to endure Jake Tapper tweeting about it if they keep winning.
yeah, you know what else? But the Rams, I think this is also a factor. Like they didn't play a home game last week; they were in Arizona. Now they got to
Yeah.
go all the way to Philly. You know, they're worried about their houses. They got coaches who are getting dragged all around by these wildfires. I think that
That's a
takes
good point. Now you're bringing me down with all these like
I
side
think it
notes. All
takes its
right, yeah.
toll. So I'm picking the Eagles.
All right.
I'm picking the Eagles, and I hate it, but I'm picking the. All right, last game, the most exciting one of the weekend. This is fucking fireworks. Ravens going to Buffalo. I'm glad it's in Buffalo, so I don't have to see Wes Moore do another hype video as the governor of Maryland, who needs to come back on this show when he's not entertaining the whole political world in his suite in Maryland. We got the matchup, man. Ravens versus Bills. Who you got?
Bills all the way. Classic smash mouth. I hope it snows 100 feet, the night before, like every time. There's nothing better than Bills in the playoffs. And I still remember for long enough the 4 years in a row. So I'm still hoping for that day the Bills go all the way.
I'm nervous for the Bills a bit because Derrick Henry's a fucking machine, and he and Lamar together are just something really special. But
They've
at
been
the end of the
fantastic.
day, they used to say defense wins championships. Now I think it's quarterbacks who make the right decision. And Josh Allen is also a beast. I mean, he runs as hard as Derrick Henry, and if he doesn't get knocked out for trying to plow over a defensive tackle, I think the Bills have got it. And I think the Bills and Lions are going to match up. I think the Bills can beat the Chiefs too. I think this is the year where they can
I
finally
think
beat the
they
Chiefs.
can too. But I think those last two games, the home field makes a difference.
I mean, America needs Buffalo versus Detroit. We need this, right? We need some great American
Yeah.
gut story, right? And I think we need it. But all right, those are our predictions. Let us know what you think. Kevin Barron knows almost as much about football as he does about the defense and national security world. Check us out on all the social media platforms. We're going to do more sports, folks, because we're going to need the break and because it's fun and because it's awesome. And I like doing it. So keep the feedback coming on this segment and all others. Kevin is going to stick around for 5 extra minutes for the car question and much other stuff. But dude, in all sincerity, I really respect you. You're also an incredible dad. And I should tell everyone you've been a great dad, role model, mentor for me. over the years. I've called on you for advice and I've looked to you for inspiration. And you're a great patriot, man. The work you've been doing is a tremendous public servant, and you keep it cool. You know, you always look cool. You got your little thing going on with the outfits and the piano behind you. And we need a little more cool in the national security and defense space.
We do, man. We do. We need
And real cool, not like fake. I got an American flag inside my jacket bullshit. You know, you got the real cool going on. I appreciate you. So thank you for joining us.
You know, you can do anything, but you can also do it with style.
There it is. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Kevin Barron, thank you for joining us, my friend.
Thank you,
Stay vigilant.